water, land, air, habitat, community gardens, all of those things impact environmental justice as well as ecological justice. So we have with us today Ms. Kim Wasserman, who does a phenomenal job at an organization called El Vejo, she'll talk to you about their incinerator work, shutting it down. I was talking to Mayor Emanuel's Chief Sustainability Officer the other week, and it was interesting to hear her talk about you guys, Catherine. She says, oh, they helped us close the incinerator. I thought, help, that's not quite the word during that battle, but a nice spin. I love that. And so Kim Wasserman will talk to us about the work they do here in Chicago. We have Mary Mulligan with the city of Gary, who is just outstanding. I've had the opportunity to work with Mary for probably the whole 6 years. Just great e-waste work they're doing over in Gary, developing and looking at ways to pull together their downtown and make it attractive in a green, sustainable way. And then we have Mr. Ernest Coverson. Ernest worked with the NAACP for many, many years, and he now heads up the regional work for Amnesty International. And he was instrumental in a gun, it wasn't even guns. Well, he works with guns here, gun violence here in Chicago, but instrumental in, I don't know if many of you saw the, what is it called? The $5 million reparations for the folk here, particularly the African-American men here in Cincinnati who had underwent drastic trauma in the jails here. And so he worked very hard with the administration to get those men some level of compensation. And so we're gonna start, I think we have a list there. Who goes first? Kim is first. And each of our guests are gonna talk to us about 7 minutes or so about what they're dealing with on the ground. Please prepare your questions for them and ask questions that'll help you in your work back home. What are some of the things that you all can do differently? So can we begin with Kim?
Good morning, thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
It's not on.
That's not on, sorry.
It's on, but you gotta go really.
Oh, thank you. How is that?
That's great.
Wow, that is really close. Okay, sorry, not something I'm used to. I'm actually pretty loud. I'm a community organizer by trade, so I'll just add on the volume there. Good morning. As was mentioned, my name is Kim Wasserman. I'm the Director of Organizing and Strategy at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. We are a 20-year environmental justice organization located on the southwest side of Chicago. Just to give folks some background on who we are and the work that we do, Little Village is a primarily Mexican-American community. We are the second largest concentration of Latinos, or of Mexican-Americans outside of East Los Angeles. So we are the Mexican capital of the Midwest. In our community, which is about 5 miles in radius, we have about 95,000 people living in that area. So it's a very condensed, very tight area. And out of the 95,000 people, half of our folks are under the age of 25. So we actually are the second youngest community here in Chicago. And we're also really good Catholics, which is why we have so many babies. But our community is really, I think, an amazing and resilient community. In the last 20 years, we've been able to do some really phenomenal work here in Chicago with three main wins that we've had, particularly from 2012 to 2014. And those wins were the closure of the Crawford and Fisk coal power plant here in Chicago. So for folks who don't know, Chicago was one of the last metropolitan cities to have coal burning fire plants within its city limits. In our case, the Crawford and Fisk coal power plant didn't supply any electricity to the city or the state, and we got no jobs. So we had a over 12-year campaign to shut down the coal power plants, and we were successful in 2012. The other two campaigns that we won was we fought for 15 years to get a new park in our community. 95,000 people, half of them under the age of 25, and we only had one park. It had been 75 years since the Chicago Park District had built a park in our community. So this year we actually had the grand opening of a brand new 23-acre park in our community, which was built on a former Superfund site. So I think that speaks a little bit to, for folks who are familiar, Superfund sites are incredibly contaminated sites, and ours actually ranked out of the EPA system because it was so contaminated. But it took 15 years in our community to really work on getting that park. And the last victory that we were successful at getting was a new bus line in our community. In Chicago, rapid transit is one of the best features I think that we have for folks getting around. And in our community, however, there was a 3-mile gap with no bus service. So for those of you who are familiar with cities, 3 miles is a huge space to not have public transit. So in 2013, 2013, we won the extension of a new bus line in our community that actually takes folks from east to west in the city. And so those victories, I think, are really significant to kind of what our communities are looking for, right, in the sense of clean air, clean land, and clean water, but how it's also very much more complex than just a coal-burning power plant burning. It really, I think, talks to the need for open space and public transit and access to nature, if you will. So one of the really exciting things that's happened since those victories is we've been really able to go from being reactive, reacting to pollution, reacting to lack of park space, to being proactive and really looking at two things. How is it that these decisions end up being made in our community, right? So really trying to understand, how does a coal power plant end up in somebody's neighborhood? How does the decision not to build parks come about? How does the decision not to expand public transit come about? And really what we've been able to do in the last couple of years is engage with the city and planners in a really robust conversation on the needs for an environmental justice lens in things like permitting, zoning, planning, and why those things are so important. And so because we've had now more open space, folks are really paying attention in our community to their surroundings. Right next to our park and literally bordering our entire community is the Chicago Sanitation Canal. Most people in our neighborhood don't even know that there is a body of water 3 blocks from them. They drive over it on a regular basis, but they have no idea that they are literally living right next to not only an amazing piece of man-made nature or man-made construction, if you will. It's not nature, but also just an amazing piece of history, right? It's the only waterway, I believe, in the country, in the world, to ever be reversed. So, I mean, those two things are quite phenomenal. Give it the history of the sanitation canal, and it's called the sanitation canal. Don't really bode well, but. I think as a community, we're really excited at the possibility of, again, engaging in a conversation on how in an environmental justice community where we're fighting for open space, where we're fighting for access to nature, we can start to look at things like the sanitation canal as an asset in our community, right? When you talked, I actually asked my husband this question on the way here. I was like, when you think of the canal, what do you think of? He's like, barges. Barges. That's what I think of. I was like, you think of fishing? You think kayaking, canoeing? No. Barges. I was like, okay, thanks for the honest answer. I appreciate it. But that, I think, really indicates, right, for a community who doesn't know that the body of water is there, but more importantly, when a body of water has been industry's backyard for a long time, how do we have it become our community's front yard? How do we engage in a conversation that it's not a pristine body of water, that it's going to need work? But how do we also engage in our community to say we have a right to access water, regardless right now of the condition it's in? We can always fight to clean it up. But how do we engage in our community to say we want access to more than just open space? We want access to water, the cultural connection that it has to a particularly Latino community, right? But also the environmental benefits of it, stress benefits, health benefits of it. And so for us as a community, we're really starting to look and map out what's on our canal. There's a lot of industry that's left over the years. And I know that there's a huge want in the city to bring that industry back, but our thinking really is around the fact that industry hasn't been in our neighborhood in 20 years. They're probably not coming tomorrow. And so how do we start getting some of these pieces of land on the tax roll? How do we start getting them developed, even if it is open space, even if it is recreational? You know, how do we start to beautify that part of our city so that industry does want to move in, so that we do have a balance of open space, nature, and industry, thinking not just right now in the current, but also in the future. The other thing that this really led us to think about is, you know, how do we work with industry in our community? We're not trying to shut down all the industry in our community. We're really trying to think about how can you be a sustainable, responsible neighbor in our community. I wish I could say that industry was down the road in an industrial corner. It's not. It's legitimately right next door to our homes. It's right across the street from us. We have metal shredders in the middle of residential blocks. It's literally right next door to us. And so how do we as a community really work with our neighbors and industry to figure out how do we live in balance with each other? How do we live in harmony with each other? A lot of our folks work at these spaces. There are a lot of local employers in our community, so really dialoguing with them about not just jobs, but walkability to work. What does your schedule look like? Are you contributing at all to things in the community? Are you even like sponsoring a baseball team, for instance? You know, so really engaging with our community and with our businesses to try to build a sense of unity and really just try to be more enticeful to that development that the city's looking for. The way I look at it is the coal power plant burnt in our neighborhood for over 60 years. They didn't employ folks in our neighborhood. They didn't have a good relationship in our neighborhood, and they killed 40 people a year in our neighborhood. That's not the type of neighbor that we're looking for in our community anymore. What we're looking for is a neighbor who wants to build up our community, who values the health of our community and wants to work with us. And I think as a community, the legacy that we bring, the fight that we bring is to say, we can kick your butt, but we're pretty nice too. And we want to have a nice conversation. And again, I say all those things because I think there's a time and a place for community organizing and for fighting, but there's also a time and a place for diplomacy. And for us, entering in the conversation early on and being proactive is a whole lot better than being reactive. So I think for anything, if you can take away from my small part, is to really think about where does the lens of environmental justice play into things? Because what we don't want to see is the lack of that lens, having our healthcare system, having our environment, and having our community members have to pay the price either health-wise or economically because we didn't think about these things when we first decided to do what we were going to do. So I do hope that was informative and helpful. Again, I'll be here for the rest of the day if folks have any questions. And welcome to Chicago, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kim. Excellent. I appreciate that. We can kick butt. I like that. That's always important, as well as diplomacy. You know, all these things matter. It's so important that we connect dots for people. And so when we do this work, which tends to be very wonkish work with a lot of deep words, it's so important that we break that down and what that means for people. I was looking at Cleveland, for instance, who now is under the Federal Justice Department's review on their police practices. And they're estimating it's going to be a minimum of $13 million for the year to implement all the things that their Justice Department is now requiring. My antenna goes up as a conservation sustainability person because I know that money is coming out of the general budget for the most part. And I know that those programs that we work so hard to get in place, like recycling, are probably going to be up for grabs or on the chopping block. And so it all matters. Police activity does impact the work that we do. It isn't just about water runoff all the time. It's about water shutoffs as well, and we have to say something, and we have to make those connections not only for our own selves, but for the community as well as for those policy makers. Mary Mulligan, talk to us about Gary, Indiana, and the great work you all are doing under your new mayor, Karen Freeman-Wilson.
Again, good morning, everyone. I probably don't need a mic either. I'm an organizer also, community labor, environmental justice, you name it, and for a good reason. I shared 2 handouts. They're in the back, and basically I just brought it because I'm not sure exactly how people view Gary. A lot of times it's passing through, or it's from a plane looking down, or it's from a map, and maybe you really don't have a good feel for Gary. So there are 2 handouts in the back that you're welcome to. One of the things that I definitely want to share is that Gary is comprised of a group of resilient people. If it's anything I can say about Gary, the people are resilient. Make no mistake about it, history matters, okay? History matters. 2015, history matters. We're still dealing with the history of Gary from the 1960s. We're dealing with that reality today, okay? In 1960, Gary was at its peak in terms of population, but it was also at its peak in terms of the changing of the dynamics of the population in Gary. It had an overwhelming large population of people of color, in particular African Americans. And throughout this country, we know what happened to communities when that shift happened, because everybody is not about diversity. So in places around this country, including Northwest Indiana and the Chicagoland area, when a place became overwhelming, people of color, white people began to plan to move out, and that's what happened. With the election of Mayor Richard Gordon Hatcher, that was the excuse that the community could use to say, hey, we're out of here. And if you know anything about Gary, you know it is coined white flight. People picked up, moved businesses, moved homes, families out of Gary, first to the new suburb, you know, that was Maryville, and of course that land was originally part of Gary. But policy and plans, you know, things that go on behind closed doors that come out later, which is your reality. And what's urban sprawl? Urban sprawl is my #1 environmental injustice that happened to urban communities, urban sprawl. #1, we've never dealt with the realities of urban sprawl, and now we're on to climate change, okay? But what I want you to know is that the effects of what happened then, we're still dealing with, on top of everything else that's happening also. So here you have a community that has hung in there, did everything, you know, they could and knew how to do to maintain. And yes, I want to let you know, Gary will be coming back. It will be far different than the Gary of old, but it will be coming back. No doubt about it. We've been at the bottom. So the only direction we can go is up. It may take us a while to get there, but we will be going up. And I assure you, we don't have another 40 years to go up. You know, that tends to be the time it takes for us to learn lessons, to change. We don't have 40 years anymore. Kim's community don't have 40 years anymore. You know, health is real. You know, we often say if you don't have your health, what do you have, right? Environmental health, public health, it's real. And we're dealing with those issues as well. So I just want to share with you the 2 handouts, just a little information. I thought it's always good to paint a picture just to kind of counter some of the other stuff that maybe people think they know but don't really know. Gary is pretty big in terms of Indiana cities. It's probably the 2nd or the 3rd largest city in landmass in Indiana. We've dropped in population, as I mentioned. We're somewhere, you know, top, 6 or 7 in the state now, whereas we used to be in the top 3, probably, 3rd largest city in Indiana. And of course, our population is aging. We have a big group in the middle between, I would say, 18 and 64. And then we have our older people and we have our younger people who are much smaller in terms of concentrations. We are doing a lot in Gary, in every aspect. But I want to let you know, resources are our biggest problem. If we had more resources, we could do more, right? And then there's a flip side. Some will say, well, you've had resources and you didn't do well with what you had. You know, we hear that as well. And in many regards, I can say that that is true from this standpoint. Another environmental justice issue. You know, you're dealing with environmental injustices, seeking environmental justice. Even though I work with Brownfields, I work in so many sectors because Brownfields cross so many things, you know, job opportunities, health, community economic development, planning, public participation and outreach, training and workforce development, you name it, and I've had an opportunity to work in it. So it's been a very interesting 20-plus years working in this field. Now I can't imagine what other field I would have worked in because this has really been so good. But dealing with issues, we have cumulative health effects going on. So we have the historical issues that happen in reference to the environment, but then we have all of the added stuff that has come with all of the other stuff that everybody else is dealing with. We're dealing with that too. So when it comes to public health, really big. When it comes to projects taking place in the community, okay, money coming into the community, one of the things that don't happen is we don't have enough people, residents, working on the projects, and we don't have enough businesses in the community taking part. So we don't have money circulating from all the money coming into the community. So when people say, oh, well, you've had resources and you haven't done well with them, they're looking at the fact that what happened to, you know, the jobs? What happened to people working? What happened to the improvements that should have been taking place in the community? People should have been doing more, home improvements and purchases and all of this kind of stuff. Well, what I say is it would have happened if they would have had an opportunity to work on these projects and businesses would have had an opportunity to participate. That would have happened, but most often it doesn't happen. One of the things that I've been talking to EPA about, other federal partners, the state, is that when you support communities like Gary, also put a caveat in there that you expect local hiring. Now, back in the day, dealing with history, local hiring didn't work in our favor. But we've been dealing with these injustices so long, it's time for you to flip the script and make it work in our favor. Okay? It's not the same thing that happened in days of old where it cut us out. Now we're saying do what you know to do so that we can fully participate. So when you start talking about public participation, here we are again, 2015, talking about how do we engage the public. You know how to engage the public? Include them.
Thank you.
You know how to engage them? It's not hard.
Thank you, Mary.
It's not hard. And it's so much more, but I will leave it for Q&A. I'm also a practicing Black Catholic, so you know we just had the Pope here. And the Pope really helped this environment and this sector of people who are congregated here, conservationists, because he says what? The environment has rights too. And we as human beings don't have the right to destroy the environment. Greed and selfishness and power and control no longer has a place in making sure that we do the right thing by all people. You know, that was his message, and that's been our message over the years.
That's great.
Thank
you, Mary. Thank you so much for all your comments. This is another one of those examples. If we say nothing about traditional public education in our communities, if we sit back in our enclaves and say, oh, that's those people, when they're attacking traditional public education, looking to move everything to charter or online or for profit, if that's where the bulk of the students in urban centers are attending school, traditional public schools, then we have to support traditional public schools so that those folk are capable of being hired. It's one thing to say hire people, but you have to look at their education level when you come into a particular city. We're dealing with that in Detroit, where gentrification is off the charts. Harlem saw nothing on Detroit. Neither did Washington, D.C. It is off the charts the way they are moving people of color in that city, the blackest city in our country, out and bringing in folk to come and buy up the downtown. As one person can just buy up buildings like they're monopoly buildings. That's a problem to people like me who believe in inclusive. When we talk about labor attacks, when we watch labor get attacked and we say nothing about that. Labor, when we talk about our Department of Public Works, it's those men who work for the city who understands the levers and how when we have torrential rains, which levers need to be pulled first so that the drain systems work in a city. They know which levers need a little jiggling and a little tape wrapped around them because the infrastructure is aged. But when you outsource everything and everything gets privatized, you have folk with fat contracts standing around trying to figure out which lever to pull. Now your freeways are flooded because you don't have the people, the workforce. And so all this stuff is connected. Yes, and if we're quiet, we should be saying something. Yes. Ernest Coverson, NAACP, on the ground as the international spokesperson for Amnesty there in Ferguson, connecting the dots from the streets all the way back up to the suites. Talk to us.
Good morning, good morning. Thanks for having me. Well, there's a lot to say. But yeah, the question is, I mean, how many have heard of Amnesty International? A little bit, every once in a while. So you know, we're a human rights organization. And so the question is, I know on your minds, what is Amnesty International doing here talking about some environmental stuff? And so in this whole realm of social justice, we've always kept human rights work away from the environmental work. But it's all intertwined. It's all together. Because the environmental work that's happening is affecting humans. And it's a human right to have access to water. It's a human right to have access to housing. It's a human right to have access to education. All of these human rights that's enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was written within the UN does not directly speak to environmental work, but everything that all of you do on a daily basis involves human rights. And so we as the activists, agitators, complainers are here to help and work with you in doing this work. And we've already been doing this work. If it's going from Bhopal with the oil spill that happened years ago, if it's in the Niger Delta River where Shell Oil Company had an oil spill that took place and they never cleaned up, that affected the humans that live in that area, that get their water from that base, that now have no access to clean, pure water. That's a human rights abuse. And so as Amnesty International, we've been working and dealing with that. Even if we come back and bring it back domestically. You know, everybody wants to say, oh, that's over there, that's going on over there, we don't have to worry about that, we're good. But let's bring it back home domestically. You know, we had 10 years anniversary this year of Katrina. And the issues that took place in Katrina. And so the environmental issues that took place there, now we have not only from the water issue still going on in Katrina that nobody wants to talk about, we also have housing issue there. We have public education issue there, that they no longer have any public schools in New Orleans. Everything in New Orleans now is a charter school. There's no more school board in New Orleans. So all of those human rights issues that's going on. Bring it even closer. As Simone was saying earlier, we have the water issue you may have read about, some may be from Detroit, talked about the water shutoffs in Detroit. Literally shutting people's water off for being $100 behind on their water bill. Completely shut the water off. Don't matter if they are elderly or they have health issues, they have little kids in the house, water shut off, it's done. And until you pay this bill, you don't have any water. Even with that, you have Flint, Michigan, which is about an hour northeast of Detroit, also dealing with water issues that the governor, I just read the other day that the governor secretly gave out or helped get water filters for homes to filter the water in their home that they're getting out of their faucets because it's coming out dirty. Just children have now, over the past year, have gotten more cases of lead in the kids' bloodstream over this past year. We're not talking about 20, 30 years. We're talking about it within a year's time since this whole water issue been going on in Detroit. So human rights is continuously going on or being affected by the environmental piece. And so how do we, coming in today, most definitely, but then after today, how do we bridge this gap to make sure we're connected and that we're all fighting on this together? Amnesty does great research work. So there's reports on our website on water issues. There's one for Katrina called The Unnatural Disaster. It's our report on Katrina and the New Orleans issue, and it talks about the environmental piece, it talks about the human rights piece, the poverty levels, et cetera. And so we're continuously working on these issues, and we can't be separate. We can't look at that's human rights stuff Amnesty does, or that's environmental stuff that National Wildlife and others do. It's all together, because without the humans, the environment is, and without the environment, the humans can't live. And so we have to work together to make this one massive movement, because the same politics or politicians that we're fighting for to deal with gun violence, to deal with everything else, you have to deal with as well. So why not go with a full plate to them and say, fix all of this? Or we're gonna do some, do some things. But we have to be, united. So that's why Amnesty is here. That's the work we've been doing internationally as well as domestically. And so, yes, we don't publicize the work that we do a lot. We have that issue. But I want you to know that we've been working on it. There is things that's going on in the human rights realm that we work on, environmental work, as well as any other thing you think that we work on, we do. And so we're here to assist and work and continuously push that this is all a human issue, no matter if you're in Senegal or you're in South Central. We have to make sure that the environment is there for the humans to partake in, to glorify, and to make it happen. Thank you,
Ernest. Thank you.
I would like to share with my brother. Many years ago, I worked with your organization. Oh, cool. I was a part of and later led an organization, the Northwest Indiana Coalition to Abolish Control Unit Prisons. Oh, wow. And Amnesty International was one of the organizations that aided and assisted us in doing some of the research and also being part of that support that got us into the prisons and forced the prison administration to listen to us and allow us to come in and monitor because of the environment in which men were being confined. and truly destructive. So, yeah.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
We got to get back in contact.
Yeah.
They do things on this side of the water. Ernest and I talk all the time, and I'm always getting on him like, why are y'all over there? We got issues right here at home. And he always connects the dots for me. Simone is all connected. And so thank you all so much. You know, it's so important that we connect academics and activists. Our activists have a great deal of passion and emotion, as you can see. But we also are better armed when we have your academic research. And so we bring the passion, you bring the academics, we put that together, and we influence public policy, we influence legislation, we influence ordinances, we influence elections. And so it's so important that we work together. Are there questions out there? I know there has to be. We have October coming up. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and so I'm always excited when October comes. So I get to tout that horn of cancer and cancer research and making sure that women and men are doing right by their own health. Please.
So are they still filming? I don't know if you want us to use a thing, but so
Yes.
the water infrastructure, I really am hoping to get some feedback on you in particular. So our cities were overbuilt, especially Detroit had an overbuilt water infrastructure with the population. I also call I-96 the White Flight Highway, and you systematically dismantle this. But now you have this large infrastructure cost over a smaller population, and then with the water shutoffs, and then at the same time we're holding things together with duct tape or MacGyver solutions. And last I checked, it's around, on the order of $77 billion are needed nationally for water infrastructure. So, one of the things that we have in electricity markets are the systems benefits charge. There's a small charge on your bill, and that'll fund LIHEAP programs for folks that can't lose heat because we aren't going to freeze out our grandmothers, or folks on fixed incomes, or people that are trying to keep children alive in the United States of America. And so I'm wondering if there's been some thought on how to deal with the aging infrastructure, smaller urban populations in communities that have the sprawl without growth, and so you have a smaller pool of people paying for that resource, and how best to finance those solutions so that it's fair, and you aren't overly burdening people that are already overly burdened. Right. So I'm looking for ideas.
I think everybody's looking for that idea. You get the answer to that. We're going to bottle it and sell it.
Mary, may I quote you for the rest of my life?
Sure. What did she say that you want to quote?
Mary's best quote was, "You know how to engage the public. Include them."
Excellent. Excellent. Go ahead, please.
Well, I think on that, how do you fix that infrastructure, right? It's an issue. And how do you do it? We can't always depend on that tax dollar, because the tax dollar is, you have limited income. We're fighting to get $15 for, half of our population that's going on. So how do we work with that? I think that's where some ingenious thoughts need to come, and where some of these corporate entities that's coming into our cities that want to, house their corporations and their warehouses in it, they need to help pay this bill. Because in Detroit, when they was cutting off Ms. Johnson water for $100, you had our arenas, the hockey, the football, the baseball, owing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they had their water still running 24/7. But you were turning off individuals that owed $150, $200, $75 in water bill. So we have to put that pressure back on those corporations and do that, and not being partisan or anything. But even when, this is how the connection that Simone was talking about, when the president was forcing or trying to get money for infrastructure building since he got in office, many folks was quiet on that. Many folks that was in our own silos. We were doing human rights, people doing environmental, people doing whatever, didn't see the big picture that little piece of what could have happened over these 8 years could have changed a Gary, could have changed a Detroit, could have changed a Chicago, could have changed a Newark. And so we have to connect these dots and get over this partisan mess and understand that our infrastructure is old. All of our cities are 100+ years old. Water systems or whatever have been there for those 100 years. We have to fix that. And so I think that was a piece that, a lot of folks were silent on and thought that made no big difference. But as these bridges are falling on people as they're driving down the street, as these sinkholes are opening up across the country, we will see the effect of not speaking up when he wanted to do that.
If I can add to that, I think, too, the other thing to think about is not just how do we get the economics to fix these things, but then how are we engaging the communities that are being the most impacted? So in our case, our communities are being looked at for things like HUD funding for green infrastructure, and that's great, but we want more than just to be able to show on a map where it floods. Ideally, we'd like to see our young people lining up, getting educated so that they can be first in line for those construction jobs, for the green infrastructure jobs, because the more that they can get trained on that and learn about that, the more that they can then build up the local economy and the local jobs. And a lot of people say, well, what if it's not long term? A lot of our communities deal with temporary jobs.
Right.
A job is a job. I mean, at the end of the day, you're learning a skill. In our community, for instance, like I mentioned, we're on the southwest side. I think it just came out 2 days ago. Our main thoroughway is second behind Michigan Avenue in tax revenue, yet we have no big box in our neighborhood. And that, I think, shows you how impactful, unlike Gary, our dollar travels very, very closely. And it's a lot of small businesses. We have a lot of landscapers in the company, in the community. So why not have a bunch of guys who know how to do permeable pavers, how to do rain gardens, how to do all the things that are going to be needed, not just in our city, but across the United States and the world.
So that's happening in small pockets. So
Correct.
In Syracuse, New York, we have the Onondaga Earth Corps, where we're taking kids, learning, it's, introduction, job skills, and I believe Milwaukee has a similar thing for maintenance, but it needs to be mainstream.
And we have something like that as well.
We're gonna go ahead, and when you get done, Mary, we have more questions in the back. I want to move through and make sure you all stay after and talk to the panelists. Go ahead.
I think also in terms of your question regarding water, the same thing is true for electricity. Yes, and with climate change being upon us, one of the things that's already been studied is that urban communities and people of color, as well as low-income individuals, are going to be hit hard because the expectation is that electricity is going to go up. So if you already are having problems paying your bill, you won't be paying your bill later. So again, we're back at that issue of, not being able to afford an essential, one of life's essentials in terms of water. We have stormwater management. So now we have additional fees to do that. So that's added to your property tax bills. So if you're already having an issue paying your property taxes, even the smallest incremental amount is going to still make you have an issue. So, things are going up, but yet at the community level, the benefits aren't trickling down. And that's where the bridge has to be. Some kind of way, we have to begin to bridge the costs that we're putting on communities with benefits that's supposed to come to the community so that they can have a level playing field. We have a lot of unfunded mandates. People make policies that sound good and are good, but at the end of the day, who's going to pay for them?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. I like that. Things are going up, but benefits are not coming down. I do appreciate that.
Good morning. My name is Kellen Marshall. I'm a doctoral candidate from UIC in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. And thank you for lifting up the fact that academics and activists need to bridge the gap and work together to solve some of our problems. And it's not a question, it's more of an invitation to a thought about our system, because I think in systems. So we're here to talk about the what?
Environmental justice.
The Great Lakes, just in general, right? And if you think about who's located in the Great Lakes and environmental justice, we have the top 10 most segregated cities in the Great Lakes. That's Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, Milwaukee, Cleveland. We can go over to Baltimore as well as DC. Are we really thinking about what is the footprint of environmental injustice? Right? So if you think about Chicago, we're only as sustainable as our least sustainable community. But we think about environmental justice communities as over there. But we are all connected, right? So the one thing that unifies us is water. So a part of me is thinking, are we considering what is the scalar impact of having environmental injustice over in the Great Lakes across all of these cities? Because we also have the largest amount of African Americans in the nation in the Great Lakes region. And you're right, we're 10 years from Katrina, we're 20 years from the Chicago heat wave that impacted African Americans more so than Latinos simply because of family structure. So it's also unfortunate that we have not conceptualized how to help this one group of people in the United States. We're undereducated, our infrastructure is underdeveloped, and we're not even seen as an investment. So if you look at the Calumet region even, we have the most illegal landfills, and we also have African Americans in that area. We knew that that was a cancer cluster, but not until there was value found in the wetlands in Hegewisch Marsh did people actually start investing in it. So now you have people in the community saying, well, we needed clean water, but now the clean water is more important for the wetland and for the system. It's almost as though we're not a part of the system. So for our environmental and ecological allies, it requires us as academics and activists to create this voice of what is the cost to bias? What is the cost to segregation? Are we investing in our system for ecological equity? So that's what I wanted to invite everyone to consider.
Thank you. What is the cost for bias? I love that. That's a heck of a study. Anybody?
It's unaffordable.
It is unaffordable.
That's what we
And
hear
not
all the
sustainable.
time.
And as we see that it only takes one incident, I'm going to use police brutality again, and now you're out of $13 million. It would have been so much simpler to make
do
sure
the
you
right
trained folk properly
To
before
do
they
the
came on
right
board.
thing.
Any other questions? Any ideas at home that you all are working on in environmental justice that's working you want to share? Or you guys got it all right. This is the perfect crowd here. When we talk about the Great Lakes Urban Center, we have some things that we share, and I think at the end of the day, what we're hearing is the need for us to make sure that we are speaking up on behalf of each other, that we're each other's brother and sister's keeper, that we don't only, I always tell my white colleagues at the National Wildlife Federation, I love us because we talk race all the time at work. It's just no big deal. It was my boss who looked around and said, you know, this is too white. I need to bring some people of color in here. And he very deliberately did that, and I just appreciate it. And those are the kind of frank conversations we need to have, and we do it better in the conservation sustainability world than we do in other places. I work in civil rights social justice with Ernest at the NAACP. We talk quite comfortably about race all the time at the NAACP, and I always ask my white brothers and sisters, how well do you talk about race? And if you're not feeling just a little discomfort, just a little, you're probably not progressing. If everything at your event is bagels and hummus and cream cheese, probably not quite inclusive enough. I get it at work all the time. I come in and I'm like, bagels and hummus again. How about some carbs every once in a while? But that's the level of welcoming that you want to display to people when they are coming to visit your edifice. Please, go ahead, Ernest.
And with that, I mean, I think the key word you said, you have to be deliberate about that, and just spin off a little bit. You know, Amnesty was involved in Ferguson when everything was going off in Ferguson, tear gassed, all of that stuff. And so after that, Amnesty as well had to look at itself. And our delegation that went down of our field team, you know, it was me. And it was, 7 of us there? But I was the only color there of Amnesty's team. And we were in a Ferguson that was 85, 87 so percent, 90% black. Everybody on the streets was predominantly black, African American. And the Amnesty's crew that was on the ground that was fighting for the human rights, which was real, was all of white face. And so you have to be, so we had to look at ourselves and really start being deliberate on who we hire, who we bring in, who we're talking to, who we're partnering with, and those type of things. And so until it's put into your face, and you really take a really hard look at it, you know, you don't think about it. And so you have to be really deliberate when we're talking about this urban justice around environmental issues, because once again, as the sister stated, as I stated, it affects everything that goes on in a human being's life. And so she was saying until we recognize that, you know, the equation there, I say until we recognize that everybody is a human, and so we look at the people that's getting affected are really human beings, then we're not going to deal with this issue. And so we're going to have this continued segregated issue. We're going to have this, it's happening in the cities, it's happening in urban areas, but in the suburbs, everything is fine, so everybody is good. Yeah. And so we have to be deliberate in what we're doing and who we're talking to, who we're partnering with. If you're not partnering with NAACP in your community, then that's the issue. If you're not partnering with or talking to the Urban League in your community, then that's the issue. If you're not talking to public school parents that students may not be able to drink the water in the school because it's lead in this water, so they have to bring bottled water to school or go thirsty all day except for lunch, that's an issue. So you have to rethink how you're thinking and who you're talking to, who you're partnering with, who you have at the table when talking about this situation. You know what I mean? Just look in the room now. You know, you can look in the room now. It's about 6 of us in the room that's of color. And so why is that? You know, you came along, did you bring folks with you that's of color? You know, so all of those things, it's a sticky issue. You have to be uncomfortable, as Simone said, but if you want to move this to the next level in reality, then you have to also be uncomfortable in moving that way.
If I can just add, I'm sorry, I think one thing, too, that I don't want to take away from this is it's not just simply the hiring of people of color engagement. It's also how you interact. And one thing that I would highly recommend folks to look at is one of the guiding principles or guiding documents that we use are the Jimenez principles. And I would highly recommend that folks really look at those and check those out, because I think a lot of times our communities get invited to tables, but we're not resourced properly, we're not given the right information, or the interaction is very much lip service, and that's not what we're looking for. And so I just want to be clear about that the intention needs to be there, but the practice also needs to be there too. Right. So the MES principles are definitely one of the things that I would highly recommend that folks look at and try to figure out how do you bridge that, because a lot of times, and I giggle when I hear of community engagement, because we think of trickle-down community engagement, and that's not real engagement. And the reality, as the brother said, if we're not at the table, we're being served, and that's not what we're looking for. And so I think to everybody's point, I think it's about engagement, but also really thinking about what are the principles behind, or what are the values that you bring to the table to have a conversation with community.
That's absolutely. Go ahead, Mary.
And the only thing I would add is that it's simply about doing the right thing. That's it. It's about doing the right thing. If you're doing the right thing in your community where you live, then you should be able to apply and implement that when you come to my community. It's just about doing the right thing. It's about wanting the right thing. Oftentimes, I've heard people say, oh, yeah, you know, I'll get an email, a phone call, or talk to someone else, and they'll say, it's a lot going on in Gary. Yeah, we got to get in there. We got to get busy. And I know what they mean. It is a lot going on in Gary. People follow the dollars, and they want to come and they want to participate. They want to get those contracts. They want to do that work. But they're not trying to hire Gary residents. They're not trying to partner with local businesses or Gary businesses. That's not the thought on their mind. And what they say is that at the end of the day, at the end of the project, you got this end result. You got this nice whatever. And that's true. We do. And chances are we have to pay for it some more, you know. There's some cost to it, more than likely. But all of the money that came with it, very little, if any, circulated or stayed in the community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
You got to do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
Do the
Deliberate.
right thing.
You know, as an African American, I always laugh. It's difficult being considered an expert at anything when you're black, even being black. Really. I'm serious. I talk to some of my white friends, and I'll say, well, if you come into the community at a certain time, make sure that we have some food, and okay, well, we'll have hummus and broccoli. And I said, no. Well, I don't know. I'll say, you know, we need some pasta and some salad. Well, I don't know about that. And I would say, you wouldn't. You wouldn't know. And so in your ignorance, defer to me. I really am an expert on my culture. And so difficult for my white friends to relinquish power over anything, even stuff they don't know about. They'd rather defer to their own ignorance. They'll say, well, I don't know, but I'm going to go with what I know. But you don't know. And so make sure we do that. Also, make sure you have relationships before you need them. Not when a Ferguson jumps off and you go to your one black guy and say, hey, you're going to be the international spokesperson. So he gets down there with his other 6, and he's saying, okay, no, y'all don't want to go over there. Oh, no, come on, we're going to go. No, you don't want to go right now. You have to respect the culture, and you need people on board who already are your friends when you need a friend. Also, when you're planning, so often when you're a person of color, by the time they get to you, they've met 2 or 3 or 4 times already. They already have the venue, the date, the time, all of that stuff. And by the time you're at the table, you're really about window dressing at that point. So we're just going to be a little more mindful. And the big word is deliberate. Without apology, be very deliberate in the work that you do. We are at 11:09. So if you all would take just, is there any question? Did I leave out any questions? Oh, please, go right ahead.
I'm curious about, we've seen in Detroit and Milwaukee that green infrastructure and parks and bike lanes and these things that we want are often tangled up with gentrification. Yes. And I'm wondering if you have ideas about strategies to untangle those.
Help us with the bike lanes. We do them a lot. I live in Ann Arbor. We love bike lanes in Ann Arbor. In Detroit, we were irritated with bike lanes. Like, what the heck? Cars in Motown. Go ahead, please.
So I think that's actually a really good point. And one thing I was going to make a comment on is the other thing to think about is with a lot of these projects, intentional or not, displacement and gentrification a lot of times are what follows them. And so I think not acknowledging that on the front end. So case in point, we had a meeting about 2 weeks ago with the city in which they introduced green infrastructure to the community. And the first question out of the community's mouth was, you know what this looks like to me? A plan to displace our entire community. And so, and of course the city's first reaction was, give us this, we know about gentrification, we're trying to figure it out. And you know what, and what killed me was at that point when we're trying to figure it out. Right. We are trying to figure it out. You know who else is trying to figure it out? The community. Yeah. And so I think this, and the reality is that in our community particularly, we want all of these great things, and now the community has too much clean air and too much open space and too much public transit, potentially for our community to be able to afford to stay in. Yeah. Right? So the question becomes, as environmental justice advocates, I'm now technically the reason why people in my community are about to be displaced, right? So now I have a responsibility to enter into the conversation on gentrification and displacement and figure out with our community, how do you have, one, the tough conversations about money, politics, and religion, but money and politics, right? To talk about what are the root causes of gentrification? How do we have these conversations at the planning, at the development phases? So we're thinking about these tough conversations all the way through. The only thing I can say is that we're learning a lot from each other's communities, from San Francisco all the way to Brooklyn. Across the board, displacement is happening across the United States. And a lot of it is happening in low-income communities of color, like in the Midwest. And so for us, what we're trying to learn about as much as possible is everything from land banks to the tough conversations that we need to have in our communities of how do you have rootedness in your community. The reality is in our community, migration is a reality. Before low-income Latinos, there was low-income Bohemians in Czech. I'm all for low-income communities living in the city, but we're not going to be pushed out. We're not going to be displaced to bring in the ideal citizen. Right. You know, we are the backbone to the city, and so we have to have the tough conversation of where does the backbone of the city reside? Where do we have a place to be our community? And people say, well, what about moving up in the world? As the sister said, our prices are going up and our incomes are barely going there, right? And so if we're not having growth that includes everybody, then we have a serious problem. And so I think for us, one thing is having the tough conversations of where does this beautification project potentially lead us to? Where does this restoration project potentially lead us to? In Hegwish, where does that leave the community, right? And is there a possibility for something besides hike property taxes? That's why in our community, we're diving into the economic development conversation because we recognize that we don't need a big box in our community to make it work. We have small businesses. We have a viable economy in our community of food vendors, restaurants, entrepreneurship. Why aren't we investing in that? Instead of investing in the classic plans that bring us big boxes, that bring us gentrification and displacement, why not invest in its actual people and have them grow as a community together, united, not bringing in other folks and saying this is a great place for Whole Foods, or this is a great place for a Walmart, not to pick on Whole Foods, or Walmart for that matter. So I know that doesn't answer your question. I think the reason is because I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that we have to start talking about it. I do know we have to start engaging in our community about it, and we're going to have some tough conversations, and I welcome folks to have those tough conversations. Trust me, it's not easy talking about how do you shut down a coal power plant. It's not easy talking about why won't the city build a new park in our neighborhood, right? It's not easy talking about why are police systematically coming after our young people, but we have to talk about them. Right. And so I invite folks to have those tough conversations.
I know the answer to your question.
Oh, there you
go. No, seriously. I know the answer to your question. It's not hard. And guess what? The word gentrification did not just come into play today. It did not, okay? This conversation has been going on for a long time, and people have figured out what causes gentrification. outpricing, making it unaffordable. So what do? You do the reverse of that. You don't do that. You don't outprice the people. You don't make it unaffordable for them. And those that choose to move on, you have a plan for them to move on. You have something to offer them so that they move from here to there. But those who want to stay there, you have something in place that allows them to stay there. Yeah. It's simple. It's not hard. You don't have to push people out. Right. And if you come to a place where you realize that there has to be some type of bottom and everybody can't fit that bottom, it's going to be some under it, then you have an alternative for them. Right. You move them from here to there. You don't move them from here to being homeless or you know, no. Yeah. It don't have to be. It's all about simple. Do the right thing. It's possible. It's possible.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ernest, you wrap up, and then we have a question.
Just real quickly, I mean, I think on that question, once again, the piece I've been talking about is it's all connected. And so as you're fighting for bike lanes and that type of thing, also have to fight for that affordable housing. Don't be focused, don't be silo focused and think your project or your issue is the only thing. Because as that bike lane come, they're gonna have to widen the streets. So that's gonna move some houses out the way, all of that. So as you're fighting that piece, also fight on the flip side so it's not a gentrification issue just because we got this nice pretty bike lane that people are getting run over by. But you wanna make sure that both pieces are taken care of in your conversation.
Thank you so much. Please.
If I can just make a closing comment. I'm a nurse by profession. Sorry about my voice. I've been doing some talking. I just came back from Madagascar. And we looked and worked with people in communities. And we thought we were doing a really good job, okay? And a lot of organizations came and did things. And the thing that was driven home to me in this particular breakout session that I've heard before, but really came home after this trip, was the fact that, as you have all pointed out, I've heard it so many times before, I just don't know why we don't do it. You do have to talk to the people in the communities. You do have to know what they need. We went in with nets, malarial nets, to try to help villages deal with their malarial problems. These were fishing villages. These people were taking the nets and using them for fishing purposes because that was their sustainability. This is what they needed. They needed food more than they really needed to address the issue of malaria. That's a day-to-day reality for them. Mercy Ship was in the harbors. They had slots for people to come and be taken care of. What they didn't take into consideration was most of these people did not have accessibility to the coast. They could not get to where the aid was. It wasn't that they didn't want it, they just couldn't get to it. So here's the ship, this wonderful ship, and they have 100 slots a day, and they're getting maybe 20 people, and they're going, why? So what I would encourage everybody in this room, truthfully, because this has been driven home to me, please do talk to your communities and know what they need. Don't come in thinking that you know what they need, because the chances are you really don't. And you won't find out until you actually have a conversation with them. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for that last point. And don't think of it as an indictment against you or your intellect or all your smarts. There are some things we just don't know, and it's okay. The smart thing I learned when I served under Daddy Bush in the United States Air Force, the smart thing to do is simply ask the front line. My commander would come down to the front line before he would go give his brief at Dover Air Force Base about what we could do that day. If he talked to me, I could tell him the fuel trucks are late and we have no tires for the C-5. He wouldn't go out there and promise we could have a C-5 off that flight line. Talk to the front lines. It's so important. Thank you so much for coming. Please stay and have conversations with our panelists if you'd like. Thank you.